She survived the wrong number. She survived his mother's judgment. She survived speaking a language that should have died with empires. But tonight, in a glass tower-turned tomb, with assassins in the vents and a stolen access code turning the building's own systems against them, Cassandra Gabriel will learn that survival isn't enough. Not when the man they call the Silent Viper is bleeding beside her. Not when her ex-boyfriend holds a detonator wired to 60 floors of concrete and steel. And not when a text message reveals that everything she thought she knew about her own blood was a lie. They say a viper has no heart. Tonight, he's going to prove them wrong. And the woman who cleaned his floors is about to show the underworld what a queen looks like when she's done being invisible. Welcome back to Ruthless Romance Tales. And honey, if you thought part 1 was intense, you haven't seen anything yet. We left Cassandra and Minjun on that balcony with a message that shattered everything the princess has found. Initiate Phase 2. Now the real war begins. And I need you locked in for every second because what's coming will rip your heart out and put it back together in ways you never saw coming. Hit that like button like your life depends on it. Make sure you're subscribed because missing what happens next would be a crime. And turn on those notifications because this story is about to go places that will leave you breathless. Now let's watch as the cleaner and the crime lord face the longest night of their lives. The moment Minjun threw that phone off the balcony, declaring that anyone who wanted Cassandra would have to go through him first, something shifted in the air between them. It wasn't just the promise of protection, it was the weight of a choice he'd made without hesitation. The kind of choice that reordered priorities and redrew battle lines. Cassandra had pulled away from his arms then. Not because she didn't feel the pull toward him, but because she did. And it terrified her more than assassins or stolen identities or the possibility that she might be someone she'd never imagined. We should go inside, she'd said, her voice steadier than her hands. If someone's been watching, if they know about the dialect, about your mother accepting me, then they've been watching long enough to know that I don't run from threats. Minjun had turned from the balcony railing, the sunrise painting him in shades of gold and shadow, making him look less like a man and more like the dangerous legend people whispered about. But you're right. We need answers. And we need them before whoever sent that message makes their next move. That was 3 minutes ago. 3 minutes during which they'd walked through the penthouse in tense silence, Minjun's hand resting at the small of her back with a possessiveness that should have annoyed her but instead made her feel anchored. Real. Seen in a way she'd spent 26 years avoiding. 3 minutes during which Cassandra's mind had been racing through implications and impossibilities. Could she really be connected to Korean royalty? Why would Lady Seo have taught her the dialect if not for a reason? And why did the thought of leaving this glass tower, leaving Minjun, feel more frightening than staying in a world where people wanted her dead? They just reached the main sitting room when the sound hit them, a siren unlike anything Cassandra had ever heard. Low and pulsing and wrong, the kind of sound that bypassed the ears and went straight to the primitive part of the brain that recognized mortal danger. Minjun went absolutely still beside her, and the expression that crossed his face made her blood turn to ice. She'd seen him angry, seen him cold, seen him dangerous, but this was the first time she'd seen him afraid. "That's the red protocol," he said, his voice stripped of all inflection. "That sound should be impossible. It means the penthouse doors slammed shut with the hollow boom of maglocks engaging. Every window suddenly blazed with red emergency lighting. And through the walls, Cassandra could hear other doors throughout the building doing the same, a cascade of locks engaging, a symphony of entrapment, the sound of a fortress becoming a prison. "It means the building's turned against us," Cassandra finished, her cleaner's knowledge of the Kang Plaza's system suddenly, horrifyingly relevant. Red protocol is the final security measure. It seals everything: doors, vents, elevators. Nothing gets in. Nothing gets out. Minjun pulled out his phone, but the screen showed only static and an error message. Communications jammed. Security system overridden. He looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw the calculation happening, the tactical assessment, the threat evaluation, the cold math of survival. Your badge, the one Dante stole. It wasn't just a key card. It had your biometric signature, your iris scan, your access codes to the maintenance systems. His jaw tightened. Someone didn't just want access to my building. They wanted root control of the entire infrastructure. The implications crashed over Cassandra like a wave. She'd given them the keys, not just to bypass security, but to weaponize the building itself. Every locked door, every sealed vent, every automated system, all of it could be turned into a trap, a weapon, a coffin. And somewhere in this massive tower, Dante was probably watching, probably laughing, probably counting the money he'd been paid to deliver them into enemy hands. How long does Red Protocol last? Her voice came out smaller than she wanted, until someone manually resets it from the main server room. 47th floor. Minjun moved to a panel hidden in the wall, revealing a weapons cache that made Cassandra's heart stutter. He pulled out a matte black pistol, checked the magazine, and held it out to her. "Do you know how to use this?" She stared at the weapon, her hands shaking. "I'm a cleaner. I barely know how to use a mop properly." Something flickered across his face, not disappointment, but something softer, more human. He set the gun down and pulled out a wicked-looking tactical knife instead, the blade catching the red emergency light. "Then this. You don't need to know how to fight. You just need to know that if anyone but me tries to touch you, you aim for soft tissue, throat, eyes, stomach." He pressed the handle into her palm, his fingers wrapping around hers, teaching her the grip. "I don't plan on letting anyone get that close, but if they do, I put this in their throat." Cassandra forced herself to hold the knife steady, forced herself to meet his eyes. "I understand." The sitting room's private elevator chimed an impossible sound, since all elevators should have been locked down. The doors began to slide open, red light spilling from the shaft beyond, and Minjun moved in front of Cassandra so fast she barely saw him shift, his own weapon drawn and aimed before her next breath. A figure stumbled out of the elevator, and Cassandra's scream died in her throat when she recognized him. Jiro, Minjun's head of security, the man who'd looked at her with professional contempt just hours ago. Except now he was holding his side, blood seeping through his fingers, his face pale, and his breathing ragged. "Boss," Jiro gasped, dropping to one knee. "It's not just Red Protocol. They're inside. The UA Triad. They used the maintenance access to bypass the locks. They're coming up through the service corridors." He looked at Cassandra then, and the contempt in his eyes had been replaced with something that looked almost like apology. "They're coming for her." Minjun caught Jiro before he collapsed completely, lowering him to the marble floor with a controlled gentleness that contradicted the violence coiled in every line of his body. Blood pooled beneath the injured guard, dark and spreading, and Cassandra found herself moving forward on instinct, her cleaner's knowledge of stains and surfaces temporarily overriding the shock of seeing a man bleeding out in front of her. "Pressure on the wound." The words came out steadier than she felt. "We need to stop the bleeding." Minjun's eyes flicked to her, something unreadable passing through them. Surprise, maybe, or recognition that she wasn't falling apart despite every reason to. He stripped off his jacket and pressed it against Jiro's side, the expensive black fabric immediately soaking through with red. "How many?" His voice was calm, the kind of calm that came from a man who'd made peace with violence long ago. "6 that I saw, maybe more in the lower corridors." Jiro's breathing was shallow, each word costing him. They knew the layout, knew where the blind spots were. "This wasn't reconnaissance, boss. This was," he coughed, blood flecking his lips. "This was someone who had the building memorized. Inside help. Dante." It had to be. Cassandra's ex-boyfriend hadn't just stolen her badge and sold access, he'd given them her knowledge. All those months she'd spent learning the Kang Plaza's systems, memorizing the service routes, understanding which corridors connected where and which maintenance tunnels led to the executive floors. She told Dante about her job, complained about the difficult cleaning routes, mentioned the security gaps she'd noticed. She'd handed him a map to Minjun's fortress without even realizing it. "This is my fault." Her voice cracked on the admission. "I told him about the building, about the layouts. I didn't think I didn't know." "Stop." Minjun's command cut through her spiral. He stood, leaving Jiro propped against the wall with the wadded jacket pressed to his side, and crossed to Cassandra in 3 strides. His hands found her shoulders, firm but not painful, grounding. "You didn't hand them anything. He took it. He used you. There's a difference." His dark eyes searched her face, and she realized with a jolt that he was closer than he'd ever been, except for those moments in the glass suite when he'd caged her in. Except this time there was no interrogation, no power play. This was something else. "You're not responsible for the evil other people choose." The words settled into her chest, warmer than they should have been, given the circumstances. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that survival didn't require carrying the weight of every bad thing that happened because she'd existed in proximity to dangerous men. But the guilt was still there. Acid in her throat. "Can you move?" Minjun directed the question at Jiro, though his hands remained on Cassandra's shoulders, as if he couldn't quite bring himself to let go. "I can limp. Can't shoot worth a damn right now, though." Jiro tried to stand and nearly went down again. Minjun caught him with one hand, the other still anchored on Cassandra, and she saw the calculation happening in his expression, the impossible math of protecting everyone when the variables kept multiplying. The panic room, Jiro suggested through gritted teeth. Get her locked down, then you can… No. The word came from Cassandra before she'd fully thought it through. Both men looked at her. Jiro with confusion, Minjun with something that might have been hope or might have been dread. I'm not hiding in a box while you fight your way through 6 trained killers to reach a server room that might already be compromised. You need someone who knows the maintenance routes, who can navigate the service corridors they're using. You need me. Absolutely not. Minjun's voice was flat, final. You're not trained for… I'm trained to be invisible, to move through this building without anyone noticing I exist. That's what I do. Cassandra pulled free from his grip, surprising herself with the steadiness of her hands, the clarity in her voice. You're too recognizable. They'll see you coming. But me? I'm nobody. I'm the ghost you said you couldn't exorcise, remember? She held up the tactical knife he'd given her. And I'm not completely defenseless. Something shifted in Minjun's expression, pride and terror in equal measure, the look of a man watching someone become more than they'd been, and hating that the transformation was happening because danger demanded it. You could die. I could die in the panic room if they breach it. I could die standing here arguing. At least if I'm moving, I'm choosing my odds. She meant it. Somewhere between waking up in the glass suite and standing in a pool of Jiro's blood, Cassandra had stopped being the woman who made herself small. You said I became the most dangerous woman in this city. Let me prove you right. The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Red emergency lighting painted everything in shades of blood and shadow. Somewhere in the building, assassins were climbing through maintenance shafts she'd cleaned 100 times, moving through corridors she could navigate blindfolded. And Minjun was looking at her like she'd just volunteered to walk into hell, which she supposed she had. We stay together. His voice was rough, scraped raw with something she didn't have time to analyze. We use your knowledge and my training. But if I tell you to run, you run. If I tell you to hide, you hide. No arguments, no heroics. Agreed? It wasn't really a question. But Cassandra nodded anyway, and the relief that flickered across his face was almost worth the terror curling in her stomach. Almost. Jiro, panic room. Lock yourself in. If we're not back in 2 hours, activate the distress beacon. Minjun pulled a smaller pistol from the weapons cache and checked it with practiced efficiency. He turned to Cassandra, weighing the weapon in his hand, then made a decision that surprised her. He didn't offer her the gun. Instead, he pulled out a small canister. Pepper spray. Commercial grade. You know how to use it? Point and press. Close enough. He clipped it to her waistband alongside the knife. The spray gives you distance. The knife is last resort. But the best weapon you have is the same one you've always had the ability to see the paths no one else notices. He moved to the hidden panel that controlled the penthouse's private systems, bypassing the building's compromised network. Show me the route, the one they won't expect. Cassandra closed her eyes, visualizing the blueprints she'd studied during training, the routes she'd walked with her cleaning cart, the spaces between the official layout and the reality of a building's hidden infrastructure. There's a service duct that runs parallel to the main elevator shaft. Too small for maintenance, so it's never patrolled. It connects to the 47th floor's HVAC room, which has direct access to the server room corridor. Too small for maintenance means too small for grown men. Minjun's eyes narrowed. Can we fit? You'll have to move sideways in some sections. But yes. She opened her eyes, found him watching her with an intensity that made her skin feel too tight. It's going to be uncomfortable, claustrophobic, dark. I've crawled through worse for less important reasons. Something in his tone made her think he wasn't just talking about physical spaces. He moved toward the panel that would release the hidden access to the maintenance level, then paused, turning back to her. Cassandra, what I said on the balcony, about you being my problem. Now isn't the time? She cut him off, not because she didn't want to hear it, but because she was terrified of what he might say, of how hearing it might change everything in a moment when she needed to focus on pure survival. But Minjun shook his head. Now is exactly the time. Because if this goes wrong, if I don't… He stopped, recalibrated. You're not my problem. You never were. You're the first person in 10 years who looked at me and saw something worth more than fear or loyalty bought with money. His jaw worked, like the words were physical things he had to force out. I answered your text because I'd been watching you on the security feeds. Not because I was bored, because you were different, real. And I didn't know what to do with that except find out who you were. The confession landed like a blow. Cassandra's breath caught, her mind trying to process the implications. He'd been watching her, learning her patterns, seeing her when she thought she was invisible. All before the night Dante broke her arm, before the accidental text, before any of this started. It should have felt like a violation, should have made her angry. Instead, it made her understand that whatever was happening between them had been building longer than she'd realized, that the intensity she felt wasn't instant attraction born from crisis, but something that had been growing in the spaces between his observation and her unknowing performance of her daily life. After this, she said quietly, we're going to have a long conversation about boundaries and the definition of stalking. His lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. I'll look forward to it. Then the moment broke, and they were moving, Min-jun triggering the hidden panel that revealed the maintenance access. Cassandra stepping into the narrow corridor beyond with the tactical knife gripped in her hand and her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind them, Jiro dragged himself toward the panic room. Ahead, somewhere in the building's dark veins, assassins waited. And somewhere deeper in the parts of herself she'd kept locked away for 26 years, Cassandra felt something dangerous awakening, not just survival instinct, but the recognition that she'd spent her whole life being invisible because she'd been afraid of what she might become if anyone actually saw her. Min-jun saw her, and she was about to show him exactly what that meant. The service duct was exactly as hellish as Cassandra had promised. Min-jun moved sideways through the narrow passage, his shoulders scraping metal on both sides, the air thick with decades of accumulated dust and the metallic taste of old ventilation systems. Red emergency lighting filtered through grates every 20 feet, painting their progress in intermittent flashes of crimson and shadow. Ahead of him, Cassandra navigated the cramped space with unsettling grace, her smaller frame allowing her to move faster, more confidently. She tied her hair back with something from her pocket, and in the dim light, covered in dust and carrying a knife like she'd been born to it, she looked nothing like the woman who'd poured tea with a broken arm just hours ago. She looked feral, dangerous, alive in a way that made Min-jun's chest tighten with something he refused to name yet. There's a junction ahead, she whispered, her voice carrying back to him in the confined space. 3 branches. Left goes to executive offices, right to the loading docks. Center continues up toward the server floors. Min-jun was about to respond when he heard the metallic scrape of someone else in the ductwork, distant but distinct, coming from the right branch. He touched Cassandra's ankle, the only part of her he could reach, and she froze instantly. Good instincts. The scraping grew louder, voices in Mandarin echoing through the metal tunnels. Thermal shows 2 signatures. This level, Sector 7. They had thermal imaging. Min-jun's jaw clenched. The building's own security systems, designed to track intruders, were now hunting them. Dante hadn't just sold access. He'd given the UA Triad the ability to weaponize every sensor, every camera, every automated defense. Cassandra looked back at him, her eyes wide in the red emergency light. He could see her mind working, processing their limited options. Then she did something that stopped his heart. She started moving backward, crawling toward him instead of away. What are you? Trust me. She wedged herself against him in the narrow space, her back pressed to his chest, and reached for a panel in the duct wall he hadn't even noticed. Her fingers found hidden latches Cleaner's knowledge of maintenance access, and the panel swung inward, revealing a gap barely wide enough for a person. Chemical storage junction. It's not on any official blueprints because it was added during a renovation. Connects to the 48th floor. The voices were closer now. Maybe 30 seconds until the Triad soldiers reached the junction. Move. Min-jun didn't wait for her to argue, just wrapped one arm around her waist and pulled them both through the gap, his body shielding hers as they tumbled into a vertical shaft that dropped 15 feet. They hit the bottom together, his back taking the impact, her weight driving the air from his lungs. For a moment, they lay in tangled darkness, her heartbeat racing against his chest, his arm still locked around her waist. He could feel every breath she took, could smell the combination of dust and fear and something underneath that was purely her. You good? His voice came out rougher than intended, define good. But she was already moving, rolling off him, helping him up with surprising strength. They were in some kind of storage room, shelves of industrial chemicals casting strange shadows in the emergency lighting that filtered through gaps in the walls. Above them, boots clanged in the ductwork, flashlight beams swept through the grates. The Triad had reached the junction. Cassandra's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers cold and trembling but her grip steady. There's a service door. Leads to a stairwell. But we need to move now. Min-jun squeezed her hand once acknowledgement. Promise. Something more he couldn't afford to examine and let her lead him deeper into the building's hidden heart, toward a server room that held their only chance at survival. Away from enemies who were hunting them through a fortress that knew every place they could hide, except one, the spaces only invisible people remembered. The stairwell deposited them on the 46th floor, 1 level below their target. Cassandra's legs burned from the climb, her lungs screaming for clean air after the dust-choked ducts. But she forced herself to keep moving. Minjun stayed close behind her, his presence a solid anchor in the chaos, his breathing controlled despite the exertion. They emerged into a service corridor that opened onto the grand hall, a soaring atrium that connected the building's upper executive floors, all glass and polished stone and architectural ambition. Cassandra had cleaned this space countless times, always at night when it was empty, always moving like a shadow through someone else's monument to power. Now it was a trap. 6 figures in tactical gear stood between them and the corridor that led to the server room, spread out in a defensive formation that spoke of military training. They weren't looking toward the service entrance yet, but they would. Any second now, thermal imaging would ping their location, and then, "Move back," Minjun whispered, his hand finding the small of her back, ready to retreat, but Cassandra saw something that froze her in place. The lead figure, older, with gray at his temples, wearing an earpiece, was speaking into a radio. Not in Mandarin, in the royal dialect, the same archaic Korean she'd spoken to Madame Kang, the language that should have died with empires. Target confirmed on 46. Sniper team, acquire position. When the Viper shows himself, center mass. The woman is secondary priority. Her blood turned to ice. They had a sniper. Somewhere in this glass cathedral, someone was aiming at the space where Minjun would appear, and the moment he stepped into that atrium, he was dead. She could feel him tensing behind her, preparing to move, to fight, to do whatever brutal, efficient thing he did when violence was required. But he was walking into crosshairs he couldn't see, and she was the only one who understood what had just been said. Cassandra made a choice. Before Minjun could stop her, before her fear could override her decision, she stepped out of the service entrance and into the grand hall. The tactical team's weapons snapped toward her instantly. 6 red laser sights painted her chest like accusatory fingers. She raised her hand slowly, the tactical knife still gripped in one, and forced herself to stand straight, to channel every ounce of the regal bearing she'd seen in Madame Kang. "You're aiming 3 degrees too low." She spoke in the royal dialect, her voice carrying through the atrium with crystalline clarity. "If you want to kill a king, you aim for the head, but your sniper is compensating for wind resistance that doesn't exist in a climate-controlled building. Which means he's either poorly trained, or you're poor liars trying to seem more dangerous than you are." The effect was instantaneous. Every weapon lowered slightly, confusion rippling through the formation. The team leader's hand went to his earpiece, urgent Mandarin spilling out as he tried to explain to someone that the cleaning woman was speaking a language she shouldn't know, saying things she shouldn't understand. It bought them 3 seconds. 3 seconds for Minjun to move from the service entrance, in a direction the sniper wasn't expecting, his pistol drawn and firing with terrifying accuracy. The closest soldier went down, then another. The team scattered, training overriding shock, returning fire that sparked off marble and shattered glass. Cassandra dove behind a massive stone planter, her heart trying to break through her ribs. This was real. This was bullets and blood, and the sound of violence echoing through a space she'd once thought was beautiful. She gripped the tactical knife so hard her hand went numb, pressed herself against cold stone, and tried to remember how to breathe. "Stay down," Minjun's voice, harsh with command and fear, as he used the chaos she'd created to advance, to turn their ambush into his hunting ground. The team leader was shouting into his radio, something about the woman knowing the dialect, about protocols being compromised, about needing new orders. Then his voice cut off abruptly. Minjun had reached him. Cassandra risked a glance around the planter. 4 soldiers down, 2 retreating toward emergency exits, and Minjun, standing in the center of the grand hall like the dangerous legend people whispered about, his weapon still raised, his eyes sweeping for remaining threats. He turned toward her hiding place, and the expression on his face was pure fury and terror combined. "What the hell were you thinking?" "I was thinking they told their sniper to shoot you center mass the moment you appeared, and you were about to walk into it." Her voice shook, adrenaline making her hands tremble. They spoke in the royal dialect. They didn't think anyone could understand. The fury drained from his expression, replaced by something more complex. "You saved my life. The cleaner saved the boss." She tried for levity, but it came out wrong, too raw. That's gotta be against protocol somewhere. Minjun crossed to her in 3 strides, pulled her up from behind the planter, and for a moment just looked at her, really looked, like he was cataloging that she was whole, unharmed, still breathing. His hand came up, almost touching her face, then dropped. "We need to move. They'll regroup." But his voice had changed, rougher, weighted with something unspoken. Cassandra nodded, let him lead her toward the corridor that would take them to the server room, and tried not to think about how his hand had almost touched her face, or how much she'd wanted him to. The server room corridor was 50 feet away when the building's automated defenses activated. Steel shutters dropped from the ceiling with hydraulic force, sealing off sections of the hallway in a pattern designed to trap intruders. Minjun grabbed Cassandra's wrist and ran, pulling her through a gap that was already closing, the metal edge missing them by inches. They stumbled into a small vestibule with only one exit, the express elevator that serviced the server floors. The doors stood open, red emergency lighting turning the interior into a metal coffin. No, Minjun's voice was flat. Elevators are death traps in a compromised building. So are sealed corridors with no other exits. Cassandra was already moving toward the elevator, her cleaner's knowledge of the building's layout overriding fear. This express shaft has manual override cables. If the power cuts, we can climb. Behind them, the sound of boots on marble, the triad regrouping, coming fast. Minjun swore in Korean, something vicious and creative, and followed her into the elevator. He slammed the emergency stop button, buying them seconds while the doors fought their automated close sequence. There. Cassandra pointed to the ceiling hatch. We can access the shaft, climb to 47. The lights went out. Complete darkness, then the sickening lurch of freefall as the elevator cables released. Cassandra's stomach dropped into her throat, her scream swallowed by the rushing air as they plummeted down the shaft. Minjun's arms wrapped around her, turning them so his back would hit first, his body becoming her shield as emergency brakes engaged with a metallic shriek that could have torn the world apart. The elevator car caught, suspended, swaying violently between floors. Sparks rained down through the hatch above them, falling like dying stars in the darkness. The red emergency lighting flickered back on, painting everything in shades of blood and shadow. Cassandra couldn't breathe, couldn't think. They were hanging in a shaft 60 stories above ground, the elevator creaking ominously, cables groaning with stress they weren't designed to handle. Minjun's arms were still locked around her, his heart hammering against her back, both of them pressed against the elevator wall. Are you hurt? His voice was rough in her ear, breath hot against her neck. No, you? She could feel him checking himself, the small movements of someone cataloging damage, bruised. Nothing broken. His arms didn't release her. If anything, they tightened. Cassandra, what you did back there, stepping into that atrium, was stupid. I know. She tried to turn in his grip, needing to see his face, and he let her, their bodies still pressed together in the confined space. In the red emergency light, his face was all sharp angles and shadows, his eyes dark and intense, and looking at her like she was both the answer and the question he'd been asking his entire life. It was brave. His hand came up, and this time he didn't stop himself from touching her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about him. Terrifying, but brave. The elevator groaned, dropped an inch, and they both froze. The moment stretched between them, fragile as the cables holding them suspended over death. Cassandra could feel every point where their bodies touched, could feel the heat of him through their clothes, could feel her own heartbeat syncing with his. We need to climb out, she whispered, but neither of them moved. We do. His thumb still traced her cheek, his gaze dropping to her lips, and she realized with startling clarity that he wanted to kiss her, that she wanted him to, that they were hanging in an elevator shaft with assassins hunting them and a building trying to kill them, and somehow this moment felt more dangerous than any of it. Minjun seemed to reach the same conclusion. He pulled back, breaking the contact, and the loss of his warmth felt like physics itself had turned against her. Show me how to reach the hatch. His voice was controlled again, professional, the moment sealed away, but as Cassandra helped him climb, as they pulled themselves into the dark shaft and began the brutal ascent toward the server room, she knew that something had shifted. The question wasn't whether they were falling for each other anymore. It was whether they'd survive long enough to figure out what that meant. Climbing an elevator shaft in emergency lighting while assassins prowled. The building was exactly as nightmarish as Cassandra had imagined. Her hands slipped on the metal ladder rungs, sweat and dust making every grip uncertain. Below them, the destroyed elevator swayed on its damaged cables, a 60-story drop into darkness yawning beneath her feet. Minjun climbed above her, his body positioned so that if she fell, he'd catch her. The tactical consideration should have felt impersonal, but somehow it didn't. Somehow it felt like the most intimate thing anyone had ever done for her, choosing to put himself between her and death, over and over, like it was the most natural thing in the world. There, she pointed to a service hatch 2 levels up. That opens into the 47th floor mechanical room. From there, we can access the server corridor through the cable management tunnel. Cable management tunnel. Minjun's voice held dark amusement. Let me guess, too small for normal people? Too small for people who think claustrophobia is a personality flaw. She reached the hatch, fingers finding the emergency release. But I've used it dozens of times. The server room generates heat, which means the cooling systems need constant maintenance, which means the invisible people who maintain everything have secret paths. He'd reached the hatch beside her, close enough that she could see the understanding in his eyes. You weren't just cleaning, were you? You were mapping, learning, survival skill. Know your exits, know your hiding places. Cassandra forced the hatch open, revealing a narrow tunnel lined with bundled cables and ventilation pipes. I learned it in foster care. Never got unlearned. Something changed in his expression, recognition maybe, or the understanding that they had more in common than a crime lord and a cleaner should. After you, the tunnel was worse than the elevator shaft. Cassandra had to crawl on her stomach, pulling herself forward with her elbows, the tactical knife digging into her hip. Every breath filled with the smell of rubber insulation and recycled air. Behind her, she could hear Minjun struggling with the narrow space, his broader shoulders making what was uncomfortable for her nearly impossible for him. You're doing great, she whispered back, surprising herself with the encouragement. I'm wedged between a cooling pipe and my own ego. But there was humor in his voice, real humor, the kind that came from shared misery. This is what you did? Every day? Not every day. Usually I had the dignity of a cleaning cart. She reached a junction, made the turn. But yes, this world, the spaces between the real building and the building people see. This is where I lived. Cassandra. His voice was closer now, like he'd somehow found a burst of speed. When this is over, when we're not being hunted through maintenance tunnels, I want you to show me everything. Every path you took. Every space you claimed. I want to see this building through your eyes. The words landed in her chest, heavy and warm and terrifying. Because he wasn't just talking about the building, he was talking about seeing her, really seeing her, all the parts she'd kept invisible. And the wanting in his voice matched the wanting in her own chest, the dangerous recognition that somewhere between the text message and this moment, they'd become something she didn't have words for yet. Server room access, 30 feet ahead, she managed, because responding to his actual meaning felt too big, too real. They crawled in silence until the tunnel opened into a small equipment room, all blinking servers and climate control units. Cassandra pulled herself out first, then turned to help Minjun, her hands gripping his as he emerged from the tunnel covered in dust and determination. For a moment, they stayed like that, her hands in his, both of them kneeling on industrial tile, both of them breathing hard, both of them acutely aware that they'd just crawled through hell together and somehow made it feel like partnership instead of survival. The server room is through that door, Cassandra said quietly. But Minjun, if Dante's in there, if this is a trap, then we face it together. His hands tightened on hers. I'm done pretending you're not the strongest person in this building. The words wrapped around her heart like armor. Like home. Like the beginning of something that would either save them or destroy them both. The server room corridor was empty. Too empty. Cassandra's instincts, honed from years of being invisible in dangerous spaces, screamed that something was wrong. The emergency lighting flickered, casting shadows that moved like living things. And somewhere close by, she could hear the low hum of the building's main servers, the digital heart of the Kang Plaza, still beating despite the chaos. Minjun raised his weapon, moved to the server room entrance, then stopped so abruptly that Cassandra nearly collided with his back. She looked past him and understood why. The server room door was open. Not forced, unlocked from the inside. Like someone had been waiting, and slumped against the wall just inside, surrounded by smears of blood that looked black in the red emergency light, was Madame Kang. Minjun's control shattered. He was across the threshold before Cassandra could stop him, dropping to his knees beside his mother, hands hovering over her like he was afraid touching her would make it real. Mother. Iamoeni, look at me. I'm looking, you fool child. Madame Kang's voice was weak but acid-sharp, her eyes opening to pin her son with a glare that hadn't lost any of its power despite the blood seeping from a wound in her shoulder. Stop hovering like I'm already dead. Cassandra moved into the room, checking corners, ensuring they were alone. The panic room must have been breached. The sophisticated safe space designed to protect Madame Kang had failed, or been sabotaged. The older woman's charcoal suit was torn and stained, her immaculate hair disheveled, but her spine was still straight, her dignity intact even as her life bled out onto server room tile. How did they find you? Minjun was already stripping off his shirt, wadding it against the wound with hands that shook imperceptibly. The same way they found everything that boy's stolen access gave them the panic room override codes. Madame Kang's eyes found Cassandra then, and something complicated moved through her expression. But they didn't expect me to still know how to use a letter opener as a weapon. I may be old, but I'm not decorative. Despite everything, Cassandra felt her lips twitch. The woman had been attacked by trained killers and still maintained her cutting commentary. The girl. Madame Kang's hand shot out, gripping Cassandra's wrist with surprising strength. Come here. Let me look at you properly. Cassandra knelt beside Minjun, acutely aware of his bare shoulder pressed against hers, of the way his breathing had gone shallow with fear for his mother. Madame Kang studied her face with those sharp, assessing eyes, and Cassandra had the unsettling feeling of being seen all the way through, every secret exposed. You look like her, Madame Kang said finally, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. Like your mother, Princess Xiaomi Jin, the woman my family swore to protect 30 years ago, before the coup, before the exile, before she disappeared into America with nothing but a new name and a daughter she never told about her blood. The words hit Cassandra like physical blows. What are you talking about? My mother was nobody. She died when I was 2. Your mother was exiled royalty, and she died protecting the secret of what you were. Madame Kang's grip tightened. That text message, Phase 2, it's not a threat. It's a summons. There are people who've been waiting 24 years for you to be old enough, aware enough, strong enough to reclaim what was taken from your bloodline. Minjun's face had gone carefully blank, the way it did when he was processing information that changed everything. You knew. All this time, you knew who she was. I suspected when she spoke the dialect. I was certain when I saw her face in proper light. Madame Kang coughed, blood flecking her lips. The Kang family's debt isn't to the old throne. It's to her. To the child we failed to protect when her mother fled. Cassandra's mind was spinning, rejecting and accepting in equal measure. If this is true, if any of this is true, why now? Why come after me now? Because, child, you're not just a lost princess. Madame Kang's smile was grim. You're the only legitimate heir to assets worth $3 billion, hidden in accounts that can only be accessed with your biometric signature and the royal dialect. Her eyes moved between Cassandra and her son. The people hunting you don't want you dead. They want you compliant, controlled, married into the right family to secure the right alliances. The implications crystallized with horrifying clarity. Dante, his desperation, was bought and paid for by people who needed access to this building, to you, to everything. Minjun's voice was cold now, lethal. The Yue triad isn't working alone. This is bigger. Madame Kang squeezed Cassandra's wrist one more time. The server room. Reset the protocols. Then get her out of this city. Because if they can't control her, they will kill her. And I didn't survive 30 years protecting her mother's secret just to watch her daughter die in my son's tower. They left Madame Kang barricaded in the server room with Minjun's weapon and a direct line to what remained of his security team. The red protocol reset required physical access to the basement power grid, a failsafe designed to prevent remote overrides, which meant going down, not up, descending into the building's foundation while enemies controlled everything above them. Cassandra led them through a maintenance stairwell that smelled like rust and decades of neglect, her mind still reeling from Madame Kang's revelation. Princess. Heir. $3 billion. None of it felt real, but the blood on the older woman's shoulder had been real enough, and the desperation in Minjun's eyes when he'd left his mother behind had been real enough. You don't have to believe it, Minjun said quietly, reading her silence as they descended. The princess thing, the money, none of it changes who you are. It changes everything about who I am. Cassandra's voice cracked on the words. I spent 24 years thinking I was nobody, thinking my mother abandoned me to foster care because I wasn't worth keeping. And now you know she was protecting you, hiding you, loving you the only way she could. He caught her hand, stopping their descent for just a moment. My mother recognized that. The sacrifice. The kind of love that chooses your child's safety over your own happiness. Cassandra wanted to respond, but her throat was too tight. Instead, she squeezed his hand and kept moving, down into the darkness where the building's power lived, where this nightmare had to end. The basement power grid was a cavern of industrial machinery, transformers the size of cars, cable bundles as thick as tree trunks, and the constant electric hum of enough voltage to power a small city. Emergency lighting barely penetrated the space, leaving pools of impenetrable shadow between the equipment. Cassandra saw him the moment they entered. Dante stood on the main platform above the primary transformer, wild-eyed and manic, holding something in his hands that made her blood freeze a detonator, professional grade, wired to charges she could see attached to structural supports throughout the basement. Cassie. His voice echoed through the space, too loud, chemical bright with whatever drugs were keeping him upright. They said you'd come. They said you'd bring him, the famous silent viper, brought to his knees by a cleaning lady. Minjun moved to step forward, but Cassandra grabbed his arm. Something was wrong. Dante was positioned too perfectly, his stance too confident for a man who should be terrified. This wasn't just desperation, this was theater. Someone was watching, directing, using Dante as a puppet for an audience of one. What do they have on you? Cassandra called out, keeping her voice steady. The triad. What did they promise you? Freedom from debt, money, respect. Dante laughed, the sound brittle and breaking. Everything you couldn't give me because you were too busy scrubbing other people's floors to see what I needed. I saw exactly what you needed: control over someone weaker than you. Someone you could break to feel powerful. She took a step forward, ignoring Minjun's warning grip on her arm. But you were never powerful, Dante. You were just desperate. And desperate men make excellent pawns. Cassandra, don't. Minjun's voice held warning, but she kept moving, kept her eyes locked on Dante's face, reading the micro-expressions, the tells she'd learned from months of survival. Did they tell you what happens after you press that button? Did they promise to get you out? Another step. Or did they just need you to keep us talking while they moved into position? Dante's expression flickered: confusion, fear, dawning realization. He looked to his left, where shadows moved between transformers, where the triad soldiers were supposed to be waiting. But the shadows were empty. Silent, because they'd left him, used him, abandoned him the moment he'd outlived his usefulness. No. Dante's hand tightened on the detonator. No, they promised, they said. They lied. Minjun's voice was cold, final. The way you lied to her, the way you hurt her, the way you sold her for pieces of silver and called it love. Something broke in Dante's expression. Rage and pain and desperate, cornered animal fear. His thumb moved toward the detonator button. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Dante staggered backward, the detonator slipping from his fingers, clattering on the metal platform but not falling, not triggering. The shot had come from behind them, a single, precise round that had hit Dante's shoulder, disabling without killing. Cassandra spun to see Jiro leaning against the doorway, pale and bleeding but somehow still standing, his weapon raised, his face carved from stone and professional duty. Boss, Jiro rasped. Detonator's dead man's switch. If he falls, we all go. Dante clutched his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers, his eyes wild with pain and betrayal. You shot me. After everything I did for them, you did nothing for anyone but yourself. Cassandra's voice cut through his self-pity like a blade. She moved toward the platform, toward the man who'd broken her arm and sold her life, and she felt something cold and clear settle in her chest. Not hatred, not even anger anymore, just the recognition that this man had taken up too much space in her fear for too long. Minjun moved to follow her, but she raised a hand, stopping him. This is mine. She climbed the platform stairs, each step deliberate, while Dante backed away until he hit the railing, nowhere left to run. The detonator lay between them, its red light blinking steadily, waiting for the dead man's switch to release or the trigger to press. You were right, Cassandra said quietly, stopping just out of reach. I was invisible. I made myself small. I cleaned floors and lived in the spaces between other people's lives because I was afraid of what would happen if anyone actually saw me. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw not the monster who'd haunted her nightmares, but the small, broken man he'd always been. But you didn't make me invisible, Dante. I chose that, and now I'm choosing something else. What are you going to do? His voice shook. Kill me? You don't have it in you, Cassie. You're too soft. I'm going to let you live. The words stopped him cold. I'm going to let you stand there bleeding and broken and know that I survived you, that I became more than you ever imagined I could be, that the woman you tried to destroy saved the man you tried to sell her to, and together we're going to walk out of this basement while you explain to the police exactly who hired you, what they wanted, and how you betrayed everyone stupid enough to trust you. She could see the realization hit him that death would have been mercy, that living as a traitor to the triad, as an informant in protective custody, as the man who'd failed everyone, including himself, was a fate worse than any quick ending. You don't get to haunt me anymore, Cassandra continued. You're just a bad decision I survived. That's all you'll ever be. She turned her back on him then, walked down the platform stairs with her head high, and let Minjun's hand find hers as Jiro called for backup to secure the basement and the bomb squad to disarm the charges. Behind them, Dante collapsed to his knees, sobbing, the detonator still blinking its steady red countdown that would never reach 0 because Cassandra Gabriel had already defused the only weapon he'd ever really had her fear. Minjun pulled her into the shadows between the transformers, his hands framing her face, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're terrifying. You know that?" "I'm learning." She could feel herself shaking now, adrenaline and aftermath combining into tremors she couldn't control. "Is your mother alive?" Demanding, already planning how to weaponize your bloodline for political advantage. His thumb traced her cheekbone, the gesture becoming familiar, necessary. "But that's tomorrow's war. Tonight," his voice roughened, "tonight I need to know you're real, that we're real, that I didn't imagine what's been building between us." Cassandra looked up at this dangerous, complicated man who'd answered a desperate text and somehow become the first person to see her completely. "You're not imagining it. I don't know what it is yet, but it's real. Good." The word was barely a breath before he kissed her. It wasn't the desperate kiss from the elevator, this was deliberate, claiming, a promise made in the dark, with the taste of survival on both their tongues. His hands slid into her hair, hers fisted in his shirt, and for a moment there was no building trying to kill them, no enemies hunting them, no impossible bloodlines or billion-dollar inheritances, just two people who'd crawled through hell together and found something worth keeping on the other side. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cassandra rested her forehead against his chest and let herself feel it, the fear, the relief, the recognition that her life had just been rewritten in ways she'd spend years understanding. "Phase 2, she whispered against his shirt. "Whatever that message meant, we'll face it, together." His arms tightened around her. "But first, we get out of this basement. We get my mother proper medical attention. We make sure Dante talks. And then," he pulled back enough to meet her eyes, "then we figure out what it means that I'm in love with a woman who might be a princess." The words should have terrified her. Instead, they felt like the first true thing anyone had said all night. "I'm definitely not ready to hear that yet," she managed. "I know, but I needed to say it anyway." He kissed her forehead, gentle despite everything. "Come on, Your Highness. Let's go reclaim your tower." Dawn broke over Chicago like a promise, painting the Kang Plaza's shattered windows in shades of gold and rose. Cassandra stood in the lobby, the same lobby where she'd once pushed a cleaning cart and made herself invisible, and watched as paramedics loaded Dante into an ambulance, federal agents flanking him on both sides. He'd talked, given them everything, names, accounts, the entire network of people who'd tried to use her bloodline as a bargaining chip in games she was only beginning to understand. She should have felt satisfaction. Instead, she just felt tired. "You should sit," Minjun said quietly, appearing beside her with coffee that actually smelled decent. "You've been standing for 2 hours. If I sit, I'll have to think about everything that just happened." She took the coffee anyway, let the warmth ground her. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that yet." "Then don't think. Just breathe." He stood close enough that their shoulders touched, close enough that she could lean into him without it feeling like weakness. "The rest can wait." Across the lobby, Madame Kang sat in a wheelchair despite her protests, her shoulder properly bandaged, her spine still impossibly straight as she gave orders to Minjun's security team. When she caught Cassandra looking, the older woman's expression softened just slightly, just enough to show that something fundamental had shifted between them. Madame Kang raised a hand, beckoning. Cassandra glanced at Minjun, who nodded encouragement, and crossed the lobby to stand before the woman who'd tried to have her killed and then bled, protecting her secret. "Sit, child. You look like you're about to collapse." It wasn't a request. Cassandra sat in the chair beside the wheelchair, and Madame Kang studied her with those sharp, assessing eyes. "My lawyers have been busy overnight. Your mother's accounts, the holdings, the inheritance, it's all legitimate. You are exactly who I said you were, a princess of a kingdom that doesn't exist anymore." Cassandra's laugh was hollow. "What am I supposed to do with that?" "Whatever you choose." Madame Kang's hand covered hers, the touch surprising in its gentleness. "Your mother gave up everything to keep you safe, to give you a life where you could choose your own destiny instead of having it chosen for you. The money, the title, the bloodline, those are tools, not chains. You decide what to build with them, and if I decide I don't want any of it? If I just want to be Cassandra Gabriel, former cleaner, current disaster, then you'll be the richest disaster in 2 hemispheres." Madame Kang's lips twitched. "But I don't think that's what you'll choose. I've watched you these past hours. You're not a woman who runs from power. You're a woman who spent 26 years learning how to survive in the spaces others don't see. That's not weakness hiding. That's strategy waiting for the right moment." The words settled into Cassandra's chest, warm and terrifying and possibly true. She looked across the lobby to where Min Jun stood coordinating with Jiro, his shirt still streaked with dust and blood, his exhaustion visible in every line of his body. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, and the expression that crossed his face, relief and possession, and something deeper that neither of them had named yet, made her breath catch. "He loves you," Madame Kang observed. "My son has never loved anything except this empire and the ghosts of his past. You've made him remember he's human. That's either the best thing that's ever happened to him or the most dangerous. Possibly both. I don't know how to be what he needs." The confession came out smaller than Cassandra intended. "I don't know how to be a princess, or a queen, or whatever I'm supposed to be. I just know how to clean floors and stay invisible and survive." "Good. Those are better skills than you'd think." Madame Kang squeezed her hand once, then released her. "Now go. He's been watching you for the past 10 minutes like you might disappear if he looks away. Put the poor man out of his misery." Cassandra stood, but paused. "The Kang family's oath. The one you swore to my mother. Does it transfer to me?" "It already has. The moment I told you the truth." Madame Kang's smile was sharp as a blade. "You're family now, child. For better or worse, you're one of us. Which means you have an entire syndicate at your back if you ever need it. And given who you are and what you're worth, you will need it." The words should have felt like a threat. Instead, they felt like armor. Cassandra crossed back to Min Jun, who dismissed Jiro with a look and turned his full attention to her. "My mother giving you the family history?" "Something like that." Cassandra set down her coffee, took both his hands in hers, and forced herself to say what needed saying. "Min Jun, I need to leave Chicago for a while. There are accounts to settle, lawyers to meet with, a whole inheritance to sort through. And I need to do it without dragging you into more danger than I already have." She watched his face shudder, watched the walls go up, and rushed on before he could speak. "But I'm coming back. Because everything I just survived, everything I just learned about myself, none of it changes the fact that the most important thing that happened to me wasn't finding out I'm a princess. It was finding out that when I sent a desperate text into the dark, you answered. You could have ignored it. You could have sent security. Could have done 100 things that weren't personally carrying me out of that stairwell and forcing me to see that I was worth saving." His hands tightened on hers. "Cassandra, let me finish." Her voice shook but held. "I don't know how to be in love yet. I don't know if what I feel is real or just trauma bonding or gratitude dressed up as something more. But I know that when I think about my future, you're in it. And I know that whatever I build with this inheritance, whatever I become, I want you beside me. If you'll wait." Min Jun was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face in the morning light. Then he pulled her close, one hand sliding into her hair, and kissed her with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about him. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. "I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to figure out who you are without me, so that when you come back, you're choosing me instead of just surviving with me." His thumb traced her cheekbone in the gesture that had become theirs. "But know this, you already know how to be in love. You've been doing it since you stepped into that atrium and spoke in the royal dialect to save my life. Love isn't the butterflies or the romance or the perfect moments. It's choosing to stand beside someone when it would be easier to run. You've been choosing me since the moment you trusted me enough to let me see you. That's love, Cassandra. That's the real thing." The words broke something open in her chest, and she let herself cry against his shirt while he held her, while the morning light painted them both in gold, while the building that had been their battlefield slowly transformed back into just glass and steel, and the promise of something new. 3 months later. Cassandra Gabriel, though her legal name was now Cassandra C.O. Gabriel, with all the rights and titles that came with it, stood in the penthouse of the Kang Plaza and looked out over the city that had tried to kill her and somehow become home instead. The inheritance had been even more complex than Madame Kang had suggested. Property in Seoul, Tokyo, and Singapore. Investment portfolios that required teams of lawyers to untangle. And yes, $3 billion, give or take a few $100 million depending on market fluctuations. She'd spent the past 3 months learning how to manage wealth she'd never imagined, meeting with distant relatives who'd thought her mother's line was extinct, and slowly, carefully, deciding what kind of legacy she wanted to build. The decision had been easier than expected. She'd established a foundation, half funded by her inheritance, half funded by an anonymous donation from the Kang Syndicate that provided housing, education, and opportunities for children aging out of foster care. The invisible kids, the ones who learned to survive in the spaces between other people's lives. She'd named it the Seo Hee Foundation, after the woman who'd given her the language that saved her life. And then she'd come back to Chicago. Back to the glass tower. Back to Minjun. The elevator chimed. She didn't turn, just smiled as familiar footsteps crossed the marble floor, as familiar arms wrapped around her waist from behind, as Minjun's chin came to rest on her shoulder. How was Seoul? His voice was warm against her ear. Exhausting. Complicated. Full of relatives who want to use my bloodline for political leverage. She leaned back into his chest. Madame Kang sends her regards, and a reminder that I promised to have dinner with her next week. My mother is conspiring to keep you close. She's decided you're good for me. He turned her in his arms, and the expression on his face open, unguarded, real, made her heart stutter the way it always did. Is she right? I don't know. Am I good for you? Cassandra reached up, traced the line of his jaw. You're a crime lord. I'm supposedly a princess. This is either a terrible idea or the best decision we've ever made. It's both. But I'm willing to risk it if you are. He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Cassandra's breath stopped. This isn't a proposal. Not yet. You need more time, and I need to prove I can be patient. But it's a promise. When you're ready, when you've built your empire and figured out who you want to be, I'll be here, waiting, hoping you'll choose to build something with me. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, not a diamond, but a black pearl set in platinum, surrounded by small stones that caught the light like stars. Black pearls are formed in darkness, under pressure, in hostile waters. They're rare, precious, unbreakable. It reminded me of you. Cassandra took the ring with shaking hands, slid it onto her right hand, and watched it catch the morning light. It's perfect. So are you. He pulled her close, and she went, letting herself be held by the man who'd answered a desperate text and somehow become her home. Welcome back, Your Highness. I'm not a princess here. She looked up at him, at the future they were building from the wreckage of the worst night of their lives. Here, I'm just Cassandra, the woman who loves you, the woman who's choosing you. Every day, for as long as you'll have me. Then I guess we're both choosing each other. He kissed her, slow and deep and full of promise. The ghost and the viper. I like our odds. And in the glass tower that had been her prison and her salvation, Cassandra Gabriel, former cleaner, accidental princess, the future queen of an empire she was still learning to claim, kissed the man who'd taught her that being seen wasn't weakness. It was the beginning of everything. And there it is, darlings. The complete story of how a text message sent to the wrong number rewrote 2 lives and built an empire from broken pieces. Cassandra went from invisible to unmissable, from surviving to thriving, from ghost to queen. And Minjun learned that the most dangerous thing he could do was fall in love with a woman stronger than his empire. If this story grabbed you by the throat and didn't let go, if you felt every moment of Cassandra's journey from that stairwell to this ending, then I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button so hard it breaks. Subscribe to Ruthless Romance Tales, because we've got more stories coming that will consume your heart and refuse to let go. And drop a comment telling me your favorite moment. Was it the Dialect reveal? The elevator fall? That final kiss in the penthouse? I want to hear what made you feel it. This is what we do here, lovers. We tell stories about real women finding real power in impossible situations. We write romance that doesn't apologize for being dark, that doesn't soften the edges, that gives you characters who earn their happiness through blood and choice, and the kind of love that rewrites the rules. Thank you for riding this journey with Cassandra and Minjun. Thank you for seeing her the way he learned to see her, not as invisible, but as inevitable. Now go forth and remember. Sometimes the wrong number is exactly the right call. Sometimes the man they call a monster is the one who teaches you how to be human. And sometimes the woman scrubbing floors is the queen who is just waiting for her moment. Stay dangerous, stay obsessed, and never ever make yourself invisible for anyone who doesn't deserve to see you. Until the next story, this is Ruthless Romance Tales, signing off.